right, ready to hop into it?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. I have several things written down. I don't know if we'll go through all of them, but I want to talk about different forms and letters and just different factors that you can use, different things that you can use as medical evidence instead of just medical records. You know, because obviously you go to the doctor, you tell them how you're doing, and then Social Security is going to pull those medical records. That kind of goes without saying. But I have a little list here. I'm going to go down other pieces of evidence that we could use. And I want your opinion on, is it valid? Is it invalid? Why is it invalid? Why is it valid? And then just any notes on that. So the first category, we've already talked about this a little bit,
Right?
but using a assistive device, I think that's what it's legally called, assistive device or ambulation device. Whatever.
Handheld assistive device.
Yeah. So a cane, a walker, a rollator walker, crutches,
Sure.
or a wheelchair. Tell us a little bit about that. I guess the main difference is it prescribed, is it unprescribed, and then just kind of break that down.
Yeah, and you stole my thunder because the main thing that Social Security is going to consider if you say that you need a cane or a walker or something else to help you ambulate, immediately, is it prescribed? And if it is not prescribed, I can guarantee you that 99% of the time, Social Security is not going to give it any consideration whatsoever. If it has been prescribed, it doesn't automatically mean that you're disabled. It does mean that there is another limitation that Social Security's got to factor in. If they've already limited you to, let's say, a sedentary job, a sit-down job, this person, he's got some problems, but he can do a desk job. If you had a medically necessary, that is prescribed, cane, it's probably not going to make that much difference in Social Security's determination because... are we talking that you need the cane to get, from, the desk to a filing cabinet or something like that? I think most adjudicators with Social Security, certainly judges, would say that's really not going to impact their ability to get from, spot A to spot B. However, if you needed a walker to do that, you don't have a hand that's free. Think about that, just in your mind's eye. What does that actually look like for a sedentary job, the kind of job that I have? I sit at a desk most of the day, but I do have to carry files. I do have to carry small things from point A to point B. If I've got a walker, how am I going to do that?
It's cumbersome, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, walker you're usually using both hands, whereas a cane, you're usually using one hand. Certainly, your age is going to factor into that also. If you're a 26-year-old and your doctor has said you absolutely 100% need a cane, I don't think it's going to impact your case to the point to where you're disabled just because of that. There might be some other things, but that alone is not going to do it. Whereas if you're a 56-year-old and you have a cane, that's a whole different story.
Right.
It's one of those crappy answers that I have to give, which is, it depends.
Yeah. Well, what I hear a lot of times is they say that they do need a cane and it is required, or, a cane or crutches or something like that, a walker. Right. A walker is a very common one. And they do say it's medically necessary. They say they take it everywhere, but it's not prescribed because they had a previous family member that had the walker, we'll say,
right. And
so they just started using it themselves. So they are using it all the time, but it's not prescribed. In that situation, we would just recommend that they tell that to their doctor to get it prescribed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you have it already, you're probably not looking for a prescription.
Yeah, maybe
you have it already.
It's probably the wrong word.
Yeah, but you are in the scenario, which is a Social Security disability claim, you have to have a medical professional say, oh, okay, Aunt Betty had one and you have it in the house with you. Yeah, it's necessary. You need it.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes into play is, where do you need it? For example, somebody who only needs an assistive device for long distances. Let's say that, you know, to go grocery shopping, you'd need a cane, or you'd need to ride one of the carts. But otherwise, you know, if from getting to your bedroom to your bathroom, you know, no big deal. You could do that. That factors into it. Once again, you know, could you do a desk job to where really the only ambulating you're doing is, you know, maybe taking a file from, you know, your desk area workstation to some repository in the office that's where the cases are that you file, or that's where you pick up things, stuff like that. So these short distances, if you don't need it, it's probably not going to help your case. Whereas, and I've had many clients say that I have to either hug a wall or use something to help me get from my bedroom to my bathroom. Okay, that's indicative of a significant problem, and in the workplace, it probably would result in, you know, you just can't do that job. You know, if you can't get from point A to point B without a cane, even if it's a short distance, that's more indicative of disability.
Yeah, I've also had a lot of clients, particularly men, that are a little bit more stubborn with using something like a cane or crutches, and they'll flat out tell me, it's like, I probably need one, but I don't want to tell that to my doctor. I'm stubborn. Sometimes they just actually say that, like, I probably need one, but I'm stubborn. It's like,
sure,
you know, I'm not going to give you medical advice, but that does seem kind of absurd if you're telling me that you need a cane or crutches or something to help you get around,
but you ain't gonna do it.
but you're not going to do it.
Yeah, the problem is, and this is in my hearing prep, and you're right. Usually with our males, in a hearing prep, I try to warn them, the worst thing that you can do is to go into the hearing and have that pride, have that I'm Superman. You know, I've been able to do this all my life, and it's absolutely humiliating for me to admit to anybody that I can't do it anymore. Well, you got to get rid of that, because now is not the time to puff out your chest and I can do everything and stuff like that. Because if you tell Social Security, yeah, I probably need it, but I'm not going to use it, then their determination is going to be he doesn't need it. Period.
Yep.
That's the way they're going to look at it. It's kind of like, you know, if you go into to a hearing or any kind of, you know, situation where you're explaining to Social Security your problems, but you say, you know, if I really need to push myself, if I could, you know, really push myself, I can do it. Okay, well, just get rid of all the descriptions you had before you said I can do it, and that's all the Social Security is going to hear. You know, well, if I really pushed myself, or if I doubled up on my medication, or, you know, if I was having, you know, one of the few good days I had out of a month, I could do it. They're not going to hear any of the other stuff that you prefaced that I can do it with. All they're going to hear is I can do it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's not, if you're embarrassed about the things you can't do, that's indicative of a disabled person. You know, disabled persons, they don't want to talk about their disability. They don't want to talk about their limitations. They don't want to admit that, you know, the grandchild that they waited for years and years and years for their kid to have, and now he's there and I can't pick him up. They don't ever want to admit that. They don't want to talk about that. But that's indicative of disability. You know, you can't even pick up your grandkid, and it's something that you've been looking forward to, you know, pretty much all your adult life. So I just tell my folks, and I'm telling you now, in a disability claim, it's never the time to be Superman or Superwoman and to talk about things that, yeah, if I really push myself, I can do it. You know, if I really double up on my medication, I can do it. If I'm having a good day, I can do it. You've just told Social Security you can do it, and they're not going to hear any of the other stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. If you say, I can do it, all they're going to hear is I can do it. and it's going to go against you. It's absolutely going to go against you in your claim.
Yeah, you kind of you start arguing the opposite point. You know, the judge will ask you some stuff regarding your disability, and you say, well, you know, hold on a second, and then you start defending the things that you can do.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you kind of just flip. Now you're defending. You're like making the case that you are able to do things. So you just 180'd for the whole reason you're in the hearing.
Exactly right. And it has happened so many times in a hearing. And again, it's usually my males. And usually it just starts off kind of innocent. And the judge would say, you know, are you able to do any household chores? And they accurately say, no, not really. And then the judge will push them and guilt them or shame them by asking a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So your wife has to do all the chores? Okay. Well, that's what the judge asked, and this is probably what you heard. You worthless piece of dirt. You can't even help out your wife to do chores. That's the way most men kind of function, and therefore you start backtracking.
It's like, well, hold on a second.
I'll do the dishes sometimes.
Yeah.
And you've told me that you haven't done dishes in years. Oh, okay, all right. Well, what about vacuuming? Do you make her do all the vacuuming, or are you able to do? Oh, no, I do some of that vacuuming. Okay, you told me, you know, for the last 6 months, you've told me that if you stood up trying to push a vacuum, you'd have to be on a couch because of your back for, you know, the next 2 days. Yeah. And what's happened is, you know, they're telling Social Security stuff that makes them look better, but it's not accurate. I mean, it's, you know, you told me that you can't do this. You told them when you filed your claim you can't do this, but now you're kind of shamed and you're kind of embarrassed, and therefore you're saying things that you can do that you probably can't do. And it's, you know, they're going to believe you. You know, well, you know,
Yeah.
this person can cook, clean, shop, drive, visit, you know, hang out with other people, enjoy themselves, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And you've told me that you're pretty much homebound because of your impairments. Okay, they got a match. I mean, you know, you got to tell the truth, even if it's embarrassing and it makes you look weak, or it makes you look, you know, ineffective, or makes it look like you're not pulling your weight in the marriage. I mean, yeah, that's embarrassing. That's horrible. And it might be exactly what's happening. Your wife is having to do all this stuff. And it's horrible. Nothing you ever want to tell anybody, but you have to.
Yeah.
That's what you're there to do. You're there to tell the judge how horrible, how embarrassing, how humiliating it is that your wife has to do everything. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Next thing on my list.
All right.
For other pieces of potential medical evidence,
okay.
a handicap placard. How do you feel about those? Does it matter? Does it not matter at all? Do you actually submit those to Social Security,
I
as
submit
evidence,
them.
or
I submit them, but I'll give you this caveat. I submit them only because I'm required to submit anything my clients give me. A disability handicap placard means nothing in a disability case. It means nothing. Yeah, you can take a picture of it, or you can send me the prescription pad that the doctor wrote it on, and I'll send it in. Yeah. And Social Security will give it the consideration that they've been trained to give it, which is nothing. And it's because of this. Most of the time, if you walk into your doctor's office and you say, I can't walk for a very long distance, can I get a handicap placard? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't have any kind of definitive, descriptive limitation that goes with it. It's just, okay, I'm going to give you this, and I'm not saying that people are abusing it. I'm not making any judgments on that. But what I am saying that in my decades of experience, it carries no weight in a disability case, none whatsoever.
Yeah, and probably the main reason, and it makes a lot of sense that clients would think that it matters because, handicap, disability, disabled in some way, Social Security disability. Well, if I'm already disabled in this way, then they should see that and they should approve me. That logic, I can see where they're coming from with that.
I mean, well, think about the icon of what a handicap placard is. It's a wheelchair, for crying out loud. Yeah, I mean, but it goes nowhere.
Because different laws. Social Security has their own definition for disability, and it's not the same limitations or whatever the definition that your doctor is going to use to issue you a handicap placard.
Right. What would be better, and I would smile and be very, very happy to argue this, would give, instead of the prescription pad placard that the doctor ordered, have him write a 1 paragraph or 2 paragraph narrative on the problems that you have, lifting, carrying, standing, walking. Why do you need that? It would take him 5 minutes. Send that to me, and that would carry tremendous weight in your claim, because that actually gives Social Security some information, and not just like the wheelchair icon.
That was another thing that I put on the list, is a medical source statement and then also a narrative. So talk a little bit about those, but I want you to break down the difference between a medical source statement and a narrative, because I've heard you mention both, but I'm not sure. Is a narrative literally just like a letter that your doctor writes?
That's
all
exactly
it is?
what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, different representatives have different preferences on this. The medical source statement literally follows, well, it's supposed to follow the RFC, the residual functional capacity assessment that goes in a disability claim. And it literally starts with, how much weight can you frequently lift? How much weight can you occasionally lift? How long could you be on your feet, standing around or walking? How long could you sit? And then it goes down to postural limitations, stooping, crawling, crouching, things like that. And then it goes down to manipulative, reaching, handling, fingering. And it just keeps on going down. There's, special senses, vision, hearing, stuff like that. And all of those things in a physical case, Social Security has to rate.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if you're not alleging any kind of vision problems, no, and it's basically just a form, a checklist form, and they give you that residual functional capacity, and they usually, if you can lift up to 20 pounds and be on your feet most of the day, it's a light RFC. If you can lift up to 10 pounds and you can only be on your feet for a couple hours out of an 8-hour workday, that's usually a sedentary assessment. So that's how they rate those. And a medical source statement, ours specifically follows the RFC on our page 1. It's our medical source statement is a 2-page form. The first one just follows the RFC. It's basically Social Security's. We make sure to actually put the definitions that Social Security also puts on their medical source statement, because we want to make sure that the judge knows occasionally means up to a third of a workday. Those are definitions that Social Security is very specific about, and we put those on the form so the doctor knows what he's saying when he fills it out. And then page 2 is it's a little bit different for us. Our medical source statement, page 2, is going to talk about more abstract limitations. Would they have to miss work a couple days or 3 days or 4 days a month? Would they have pain that is so severe that it would mess with their attention and comprehension and concentration? And if so, how frequently would that do? Frequently, which Social Security defines; occasionally, which Social Security defines; never, which is everybody defines. Those kinds of things, and it goes into that. It goes into fatigue. If this person has fatigue, they would experience problems. Occasionally, frequently. Does this person have to elevate their legs throughout the workday? Does this person need a handheld assistive device? Is it medically necessary? That's on our page 2, and then we have a little area where the doctor can fill it out. For a mental health medical source statement, the same thing. Our medical source statement follows Social Security's mental RFC, which the definitions are similar, and we're basically looking for, do they have a mild, a moderate, a marked, or an extreme limitation in certain abilities? And so we try to make it easy we can for a psychologist, psychiatrist, or a therapist, mental health therapist to fill out. Again, our page 2 is a little bit more abstract. Would they have periods where they wouldn't be able to maintain concentration and persistence and pace? And if it happens, how frequently would it happen? Things like that. So the medical source statements, for the most part, for most firms, certainly for our firm, we want to mirror, basically copy what Social Security's RFC or the MRFC, the mental residual functional capacity. We want to mirror what those say. So when we submit them, the adjudicators who work for Social Security, okay, well, we're used to seeing this. I see what you're saying here. Okay, this makes sense to us. However, having said all of that, if I have my preferences, if I get my way, I don't want that. I want a narrative. I want the doctor or the therapist or the psychiatrist or the psychologist, I want them to sit down and I want them to write me a 2 or 3 paragraph, 1-page narrative. I've been treating, Mr. Smith for so-and-so months or years. He has this impairment. His limitations, he would have difficulties lifting or carrying more than 10 pounds. He would have difficulty being on his feet for more than 10 minutes at a time. If it's a mental health one, this person would have difficulties getting along with other people. This person likes to isolate. A narrative that actually gives you more of I've treated this person for this length of time and I know the limitations that they have. And I think it's a little bit less box checky.
Yeah.
And box checky, it's the way we're all trained in Social Security, and I come from Social Security. That's where I cut my teeth on disability. So when I first started, putting together things for my practice, I'm like, well, I'm going to try as best I can to closely follow Social Security's boxes to check. But a narrative is a superior document because, it's more personal. I think it reads better than boxes that are checked. It actually, if you look at it, it looks like, okay, well, this provider actually put some, he put some thought into this. He actually dictated it or he wrote it himself. Whereas if I or the client have given them this form to fill out,
they can do it pretty fast. Yeah.
Circle, check, sign. And a lot of Social Security adjudicators, many of them judges, they're wrong in this, and I will call them on it with the appeals council, and I will win remands on this, but they will give a reason for rejecting a medical source statement as, well, the doctor just checked boxes. Well, your doctors checked boxes when they denied my client. Don't pull that. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. However, I see what they're saying as far as, well, it looks like they just checked some boxes and they circled some answers. Yeah. Well, so did your doctors when you denied my client. So that's why I prefer a narrative. A narrative, they can't say, well, that was just, they're checking boxes, just, just cookie cutter answers. No, they actually spent some time and they typed out this narrative that gives you hopefully everything you need to see that my client really is disabled.
Right. And then I have another thing written down on that topic of writing letters. I've heard other people, this isn't super common, like I haven't seen this come up very many times, but I've heard of like friends and family writing a letter and using that as medical evidence.
Sure.
And what's like the definition of that, and how do you actually go about that?
Well, it's called lay evidence, but lay evidence can be just as powerful as medical evidence. The time we see that is usually in what they call the third party ADL. ADL is just activities of daily living. Mm-hmm. Are you able to cook, clean, shop, drive, take care of your pets, get along with your family, get along with other people, visit other people? And can you handle, counting change? Could you make sure that if you go into a Quickie Mart, you buy a Coke, and you give the guy $3, do you know that he's supposed to give you, 93 cents back, stuff like that. Those forms, they usually send them to the claimant, mm-hmm. the ADL form, but they also, when you list a third party who knows about my condition, they don't want them to be the doctor because they're going to get the doctor's medical source statement, hopefully, and medical records, definitely. But the third party, those forms can be, they can have a great impact in your case. It's lay evidence, but adjudicators have to consider everything. Yeah. And let's say that, your medical evidence is good, but not great. And you didn't get a doctor to fill out a medical source statement. He just wouldn't do it. And that happens a lot, by the way. One day we can talk about why that is. But you had three different people. You had like a pastor, you had a past employer. You know, you've been
Yeah.
out of work for 18 months, but you've kept a relationship with your employer, and he fired you, or you know, he knows all about why you left. So you have, you know, your pastor, you have an ex-boss, you have a spouse, or you have somebody else in your family, and they write a letter or they fill out the third-party ADL form, because there is one. There's always a form. And they fill that out. Well, let's say that all three of them come back and, you know, they're not carbon copies, but they pretty much agree that you have certain problems in over and over. You see this in this person's third-party ADL, and then this person's third-party ADL says the same thing.
Yeah.
And then this person's third-party ADL says the same thing. And then you look at the medical records, and the medical records are like, it's reasonable that those problems would crop up with the impairments that this person has. That's pretty darn credible.
Yeah.
And so I never roll my eyes or, you know, poo-poo a third-party ADL. Though they can be very, very effective. They need to be written clearly. They need to be written from knowledge. They certainly don't need to be dictated from the claimant. You know, just ask them, you know about my conditions, will you write a letter to Social Security? And even better, send it directly to Social Security. Don't let it pass through the claimant. Maybe don't even let it pass through me. Just send it to Social Security. And usually that would be at the lower levels. And there it is. It becomes evidence that Social Security has to consider. It's not something that they might consider. No, they have to consider
They have to,
it.
yeah.
They may not agree with it, and they may deny your claim because they're really good at denying claims. But it's something that I would use in front of
Yeah.
a judge for sure.
Okay, so that's cool. I'm glad we're talking about this because I've never really dug into this before. So logistically, when you have a friend or a family member or a past boss or someone that could fill out one of those forms, logistically, do they always request the form and it's a Social Security form, or can they do it in any format that they want as like a letter?
It's a great,
Um,
yeah,
And which one would be better? Which one would be ideal?
great question. So if you've listed a third party in your application, and we usually do when we're doing the online application, they're supposed to send that person a third party ADL, especially in a mental case. You know, do you have problems with concentrating? You have problems getting along with others? You have problems with your memory? You have problems, you know, interacting, stuff like that. So they're supposed to, they don't always do that on physical cases, but they're supposed to, in mental cases, get that third party ADL. It's usually a form. And Social Security at the lower levels, initial and reconsideration, they'll just send it to the third party. We got the third party's name, we got their address, we'll send the form to them. And I love that because then that third party, without any help, hopefully from the claimant, will send it back. And it's just a very clean, hey, this is my opinion on, you know, my friend or my former employee or, you know, my member of my congregation or whatever. But it usually comes in a form from Social Security. Having said that, anybody at any time can fill out on notebook paper, handwriting, as long as you can read it. You know, you can actually weigh into somebody's case like that. And it, you know, Social Security has to consider that. What I like about the form, and I'm not a big form guy, as you know, but what I like about the form is it asks the pertinent things. You know, can this person get along with other people? Does this person have a hard time with authority? Does this person have a hard time with criticism? Does this person have a hard time, blah, blah, blah. So the forms actually ask that, whereas if you're just a lay person writing something, you'd have to think about, well, what can I write that will help Social Security understand my friends or my congregants or my ex-employees' problems?
And they might fill it out with information that is true, but not really necessary, not really helpful for the disability case.
Yeah, and there are lots of things that might have been really, really detrimental to their employment that at the end of the day, it's really not disability related.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens. And you know, so if you spend a lot of time on that, you know, Social Security has to consider it, but it's probably not going to go very far. Whereas with the forms, they're asking specific questions for you to specifically answer.
Okay. All right, I got another. This one we won't spend too much time on, but service animals, service dogs. Is that pretty much the same as a handicap placard? Okay,
Yeah.
we'll pretty much leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, when we were doing face-to-face hearings, like I've told you before, since COVID hit, since 2020, February 2020, I think I've done 6 face-to-face hearings. Everything else has been by phone. But before, when I was doing those hearings, I've had service dogs, that come in. And, I don't think that they harm. I don't think it makes it look like you're putting on a show. The ones that I've had were just, the dog literally just comes into the hearing office, and judge, is cool with it, and and we have the hearing, and nothing's ever even said about Fido sitting there, providing the comfort or whatever a service animal does for my client. And I've had clients that come in and they have some serious cognitive problems, and they're absolutely terrified about the whole process. Keep in mind that, I say this to my clients, yes, I'm your guy. Yes, I have talked to you. Yes, my staff has talked to you quite a bit. At the end of the day, when we have a hearing, whether it's in person or by phone, I'm pretty much a stranger to you. I've talked to you. We've talked about very intimate things, your medical conditions, for crying out loud. But at the end of the day, when you're in front of a judge and I'm asking you questions and the judge is asking you questions, it's all of these strangers kind of hammering you with questions. So I have had people who, were just so terrified with that, they'll bring in like a stuffed animal. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. So it's a service animal. They're becoming more and more prevalent. They certainly don't hurt your case, but for Social Security purposes, I don't think that just having a service animal is going to be indicative of somebody who's disabled.
That's pretty much how I've gone about it as well. The only reason I bring that up, like a service animal and a handicap placard, only reason I bring it up is because I have heard people say things like, well, I have a service animal, so I should be entitled to disability. Or it's like, well, listen, I already have a handicap placard, so if they could just see that, they'll know that I'm disabled.
Right.
And, you see where they're coming from with that. But you got to make the point. Yeah. You don't just have to be limited or disabled. You have to be disabled specifically as Social Security defines it, and you got to go through their whole process. You got to play their game.
Yeah. And we, on a much larger scale, you and I have talked about this, we see that also in other programs.
Yeah.
I've got a 60% rating with the VA. They should allow my claim. Or if I got 100% rating with the VA, they should allow my claim. But not as easy as that, because the criteria is different. Well, I have workers' comp, and I've got coverage on my back for life. That's how serious my injury was at work. That they have to cover my back injury for life. Okay, and you got a big settlement, and you've got a 28%, whole person impairment from workers' comp. It goes somewhere. I'm not going to say that goes nowhere. That's not true. They actually consider that, but it doesn't mean you're disabled according to Social Security's law, because, as I've said, as plainly and horribly crudely as I can, Social Security, you're either 0% disabled, which means you're not, or you're 100% disabled, which means you are. And that's pretty much the way they look at it.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay, next one on the list, and this is, we talked about medications and side effects being symptoms, and we've talked about that a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about specific devices that are kind of like, it's not just a medication, it's not just a pill that you take, but like using a nebulizer, having to do nebulizer treatments 2 or 3 times a day. That's a pretty big deal.
Huge.
Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's, if you've got some kind of respiratory disorder, and you're hitting rescue inhalers a few times a day, but you've also been prescribed a nebulizer treatment, and you're supposed to hit that 3 or 4 times a day. That process is not a puff. That process is you put medication in a dish and you breathe in those fumes and that medication. And you do that for, usually about a quarter of an hour. About 15 minutes is normally how long it takes to do that. And let's say that you are prescribed to do that 3 or 4 times a day. I challenge any decision maker in Social Security to tell me if that's cool. Are you saying that my client who has to do this prescribed, and remember, if it's prescribed, Social Security has to say that it is necessary. If a cane is prescribed, it is medically necessary. That's your definition, Social Security. So I challenge you to tell me how in the world somebody who has to hit a nebulizer for 15 minutes, a treatment 3 or 4 times a day can do that at work.
Yeah.
Because what Social Security is normally going to say, well, they could do it on their break. Well, is a break, or is, a break, having to go administer some type of treatment? And my argument would be, that's not a break at all. A break is basically they're getting away from work and stuff like that. A break is not, they're going and now they're having to administer some kind of treatment so they can come back to work and function. So yeah, it's big. When my clients tell me that, I want to make sure, one, that it's been prescribed, and two, I want them to describe what the process is. And I'll probably have them do that in front of a judge if we're in a hearing. Describe the nebulizer treatment that you have to go through, and how long does it take, and how many times you have to do it a day. You think you could do that, at a workstation?
Yeah.
Do you? And of course, when I ask that question, I would normally look at a judge. Could you do that at a workstation? So.
Yeah, I've had clients that I've spoken to where they're using an albuterol inhaler multiple times per day.
Sure.
And they're using a nebulizer multiple times per day, and they have some kind of oxygen treatment, and then they use like a CPAP machine when they're sleeping. It's like, and your full-time job is respiratory treatment.
Yeah.
That's your whole day. Is that all day, every day? You're pretty much just alternating different kinds of respiratory treatment. It gets excessive.
Yeah. One of the questions I ask people who are hitting these rescue inhalers, albuterol or things like that, you ever have to do it when you're just sitting around watching TV? Because people with respiratory ailments, they get short of breath just sitting around. Mm-hmm. Everybody, I don't care how fit you guys are, if you run 2 miles at full speed, you're going to be panting and looking like you're about to fall over, because that's the way we're built. But that's not what people with respiratory disorders go through. They could just be sitting around, and the next thing you know, they can't get a breath, or if it's asthma, they can't get rid of all of the breath. So it's big. A nebulizer is absolutely something that I will exploit in helping you prove you're disabled.
Yeah. Okay. Glad we're on the same page, because that's pretty much how I've been looking at it as well. All right. One other one, and this is, I would say, probably similar. I'm assuming is similar to like using a cane and how you look at that. But braces, so a back brace or a knee brace, or if you have carpal tunnel syndrome, those wrist braces they give you, prescribed versus unprescribed. Either way, how much of a difference does that make for the case?
Yeah, they're going to be considered. It's not something that I'd roll my eyes at. Certainly for the carpal tunnel wrist braces and stuff like that, that's indicative of somebody who's got some serious problems. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, with the braces, are you able to grip and grasp things? With the braces, are you able to button your clothing? Are you able to zip up your clothing? Mm-hmm. With the braces, are you able to tie your shoelaces? With the braces, could you pick up a coin, that's laying flat on a table, things like that, for a back brace or something like that. With the brace, how long could you be on your feet before you'd have to stop because of any kind of back pain, or back pain that's shooting down into your butt or your legs, or all the way to your feet. So braces, they're indicative of a significant problem. Yeah, I'd want them to be prescribed. But we'd certainly talk about them regardless. I went to Walgreens and I picked up a back brace because it kills me to do, and then just, whatever they're trying to do. And the back brace helps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, if the back brace helps, I still want to know, could you do this for, 2 hours at a time? Could you lift something for 2 hours at a time that's not that heavy, 10 pounds maybe? Could you be, excuse me, could you be on your feet for, excuse me, could you be on your feet for more than 2 hours at a time with the back brace? So those are the kinds of things. So it's considered, to me, it is indicative of a significant problem, but I wouldn't go all the way and say, oh, okay, we wear braces, automatically, I think that you're disabled.
Yeah. And that's probably that's the conclusion of, I think, everything that I brought up is it does make sense that a claimant would get excited about a certain piece of evidence, and that's valid, but keep in mind, no matter what you submit as evidence, we're going to have to go through the whole process. We got to play their game. They're going to consider it, but it's not going to be like, oh, you're in a wheelchair, approved, right. 2 weeks later, approved. Right. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you bring that up, because it's a really big topic that comes up with our case managers. Once we're in the thick of the claim, they'll get our case managers have been trained. You need to push. We want that medical source statement, or we want a narrative. Push. Try to get that client to talk to his provider. We want that medical source statement. We want that narrative. And people need to realize that if we get the medical source statement, and or we get the narrative, it's still not an automatic thing. The way Social Security looks at everything is, does it all mesh to where the medical records show this, and the doctor has weighed in and said, yeah, these would be impairments and limitations, and they're reasonable considering the medical records, and this person's job was this, or this person's age is this, and you see that there's all these pieces of the puzzle that have to fit. Rarely is there just that one, I got the medical source statement. Yeah. I got that medical source statement, Mr. Groves, and therefore,
it's over.
We're good, right? Yeah. Well, we're better,
yeah.
and I'm going to be able to make a better argument for you. But no, it's not over. I think, it's unrealistic, and of course, we try to temper everybody's expectations on that.
Yeah.
We want this; it's going to help tremendously, but it's not a guarantee. There's never a guarantee. And that's a good point to make. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we do have that conversation daily. I mean, with the number of clients that we have that conversation. I've gotten you the medical source statement. My provider, he sat down for 15 minutes and filled this thing out for us. Is that it? Are we done? No, we're not done. The medical evidence and this opinion now, and the things that you say are going on, your limitations, your activities of daily living, if all of those kind of look, oh yeah, this person, there's no way they could make it through an 8-hour work day. Okay, then we're in great shape. It's still probably going to take a while, because
Sure.
Social Security has to, wend through all that stuff and make the decision.
Yeah, and that same concept applies to what we were saying last episode about potential ways to speed up the case. If you're about to get evicted and you've actually gotten an eviction notice, and that we submit that to Social Security and they speed it up, well, it's not that they're going to speed it up and then also that guarantees that you're approved.
Oh, sure.
It just means it speeds it up, and that doesn't, it's not, you're not more likely to get approved because you're being evicted,
Right.
because eviction is not a disability.
Right.
We have to also prove that you're disabled.
Right. Yeah. And that's another good point, because we get that a lot, especially from our homeless clients. For years and years and years, we have partnered with a facility in the major city that we're closest to, with the homeless population, and it seems to be a mistake that they believe that homelessness is a disability, and it's not. It's something that's quite serious and quite problematic for you, but at the end of the day, it is not in and of itself a medical condition. And so, we'll certainly let the administration know that, hey, this person, he's got housing difficulties, but, it's not really going to factor into whether they approve your case or not. And so that's what you're saying is absolutely correct. You could be evicted, we could get the case expedited, and they could issue a denial quicker. I mean, you could get a denial quicker than you would have if we hadn't provided the eviction notice. So that's just something that sadly sometimes happens.
Yeah, because I mean, there are other government programs and even non-government programs, and the way that you qualify, it is, not having a place to live or being low income or other factors like that. There are programs like that, but with Social Security disability, we're talking about disability.
Right.
And we're talking about specifically how they define it, and in order to win that case, you have to be disabled, unable to work, and we have to actually have medical evidence to show that.
Absolutely, yeah. You got to play by their rules. We didn't talk about this last time, but I think we've talked about it before. A lot of people will ask me, what's the secret to disability? Well, there's two secrets. The first secret is, and I'll tell God and everybody, the first secret is persistence. I mean, they're going to say no most of the time. And the people who I guess I'm not disabled, probably aren't disabled if they give up that easily. So if you're persistent, there's no way I could go to work. What do they mean that I could do this job that I used to? I can't do that job. I can't do any job. And you persist. And what persistence looks like is you or a representative, me, appeal the case. And I tell people, I don't really take a denial as a no from Social Security. I take it as I just haven't convinced you yet.
Yep.
So that's the first one, persistence. But the second secret to disability is cooperating. The secret is if they send you a form, you fill it out. And then if you get denied, and on reconsideration, they send you the same form. It just, infuriates a lot of my clients. I filled this thing out 6 months ago. Please fill it out again. They send it to you, and they will deny your case for you being uncooperative if you don't fill that out. Cooperate with them. If they want this information and you gave it 6 months ago, give it to them again. They want you to do this. They want you to go to an exam. They're going to pay for it. You are angry that they're not considering your doctor's medical records. They're sending you to another doctor that they contract with. Go to the exam.
Yeah.
Just cooperate with them. It makes it sound kind of like a Mickey Mouse program for me to say you have to jump through their hoops. But for lack of a better explanation, you have to jump through their hoops.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the law is the law. And they expect this. And quite honestly, they're making the rules. So if they're making the rules, we got to play by them. And the rules are, if I send you to an exam, you got to go. If I send you some forms because I think I need them to make an accurate decision in your case, then you have to do that. I've scheduled you a hearing. And I expect you to show up for the hearing, whether it's by phone or in person. And that's the way I'm going to make, the best decision I can make. I expect you to be there.
Yeah.
Well, be there. Cooperate with them. That's, it's their rules. And at the end of the day, they're really not onerous rules. They're nothing that's just ridiculously unreasonable that they're asking you to do. Show up to exams that they schedule for you. Send in forms that they send you. They give you, 2 weeks usually to fill out a form. If it takes you 2 weeks to fill out a form, call us because we'll help you fill out the form. It shouldn't take you 2 weeks to fill out a form. And then, if they schedule you a hearing or a meeting, show up to it. I mean, those don't sound like really hard, arduous problems to have to me. That's just, you'd have to do it in any other thing. If you want to get your driver's license, you think you got to play by the rule of the DMV? Yeah, you sure do. I want to get a mortgage. You have to provide all this information. Oh, I do. Yeah. If you ever buy a house, just be expecting to sign away, 1.5 inches of paperwork.
Yep.
Well, I want to, rent an apartment. Okay, well, they're going to do a background check on you, and you got to fill out all this stuff. You got to fill out all of your employment information. You got to fill out this, blah, 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 blah. You do all that. Well, why do you do that? Because it's the rules. I mean, it might be tedious, but I don't think it's arduous. I don't think it's unreasonable. And when we see a lot about that, especially form filling, I don't want to fill out form. That's what I hired you for. Well, I really don't want to fill out whether you're able to feed Fido 3 times a day. That's something that you need to talk about. I'll help you fill it out, but don't ask me to fill out forms for you. I can't describe the job you had as a forklift operator, 3 years ago. I don't know how much you lifted and carried. That's for you to do.
Yeah, you can't describe how much pain they're in.
Yeah, so again, 2 secrets to disability: persevere, persistence. Basically, you stick to it. If you believe you're disabled and they tell you no, you appeal. And they won't tell you no again, appeal. You just keep on going. And then number 2, cooperate with them. Jump through their hoops. They're not ridiculous. They're not unreasonable.
Yeah, I mean, you're allowed to get angry and you're allowed to get frustrated because it's a frustrating process, it's complicated, and they make a lot of mistakes.
Sure.
And you as a representative, you're allowed to get angry and you're allowed to get frustrated and irritated. Just don't let that ruin your case.
Right.
You can complain about it, you can disagree with the system, you can disagree with their decision. Just don't let that be the thing that prevents you from filing an appeal, prevents you from filling out a form. Don't cuss out the judge, in your hearing. You're allowed to be angry, but
Right.
Don't let the anger actually ruin your chance of approval.
That's right. Absolutely. Great advice.
Cool. All right, well, that's a good place to end it. That's going to be really helpful.
Good.
Glad we did that one.